The Wrath of God, 1972. You've probably never heard of The Wrath of God, and that's exactly the problem. Starring Robert Mitchum as a mysterious gun-toting priest in 1920 Central America, this film blended action, drama, and political unrest into a genre cocktail that Hollywood just didn't know how to sell. It had everything: assassins disguised as holy men, revolution, redemption, and betrayal. Yet, when it hit theaters, audiences didn't bite, and critics weren't kind either. The studio hoped for a hit to ride the wave of Latin American-set adventures, but what they got was a box office thud. The film's unusual tone, part spaghetti western, part spiritual odyssey, left moviegoers scratching their heads. Behind the scenes, the troubled production and shifting genre confused marketing efforts, making it nearly impossible to find the right audience. Today, cinephiles who stumble upon it are stunned by its bold storytelling and gritty performances. It's one of those forgotten gems that prove just how unforgiving the 70s could be to films that dared to be different. A flop? Yes, but also a misjudged masterpiece. Lost Horizon, 1973. Lost Horizon was supposed to be a magical musical journey, a remake of the 1937 classic, packed with songs, stars, and spectacle. But instead, it turned into one of the decade's most infamous disasters. Directed by Charles Jarrett and produced by Ross Hunter, this glitzy take on the utopian legend of Shangri-La featured stars like Peter Finch and Liv Ullmann trying to sing. The problem? Neither the songs nor the story hit the right notes. Audiences expecting wonder were instead treated to awkward choreography, painfully dated dialogue, and a bloated runtime that made paradise feel like a prison. Critics tore it apart, calling it tone-deaf and embarrassing, and it flopped hard at the box office. Columbia Pictures poured millions into it, banking on a hit, only to watch the dream crumble into Hollywood ridicule. Today, Lost Horizon stands as a cautionary tale of how not to remake a beloved classic. Behind its bright smiles and peaceful message hid a chaotic production and a creative vision hopelessly out of touch with the gritty, cynical 70s audience. A glorious failure, but still strangely unforgettable. At Long Last Love, 1975. Peter Bogdanovich was on a hot streak, The Last Picture Show, Paper Moon, and then At Long Last Love. Meant to be a dazzling throwback to 1930s musicals with the charm of Cole Porter's songs, this film starred Burt Reynolds and Sybil Shepherd, who looked the part but couldn't quite sing it. Bogdanovich made a bold move. He had the cast perform the musical numbers live on set. No studio polish, no second chances. The result? A sonic mess. Critics eviscerated it. Audiences laughed at it. Fox had banked heavily on Bogdanovich's golden touch, but instead, they got a tone-deaf, painfully self-indulgent flop. The film didn't just bomb. It humiliated everyone involved and marked the beginning of Bogdanovich's steep fall from grace. Over time, however, some cinephiles began defending its ambition and sincerity, calling it an underrated experiment ahead of its time. Still, in the harsh landscape of 1970s Hollywood, At Long Last Love was a glittering grenade, full of charm, blown to bits. It didn't just flop, it danced its way off a cliff. New York, 1977. Martin Scorsese, fresh off Taxi Driver, took a wild detour with New York, a lavish musical drama starring Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro. On paper, it had Oscar written all over it. But on screen, it was chaos. Scorsese tried to merge the glossy style of 1940s musicals with raw, improvisational acting, two worlds that violently clashed. De Niro's intense realism grated against Minnelli's Broadway sparkle, and the love story felt more toxic than touching. Add in a bloated runtime and tonal confusion, and audiences didn't know what they were watching. It bombed at the box office, almost derailing Scorsese's career and fueling his spiral into addiction. Ironically, the film's one true hit, the title song, New York, became an anthem for the city, far outliving the movie that birthed it. In retrospect, New York is a daring misfire, an ambitious fusion of old-school glamour and gritty emotion that might have worked in another universe. It flopped hard in its time, but its boldness still echoes through film history. Lucky Lady, 1975. With a cast like Gene Hackman, Burt Reynolds, and Liza Minnelli, Lucky Lady looked like a sure thing. Add a Prohibition-era setting, booze-smuggling action, and a love triangle on the high seas, and Fox thought they had their next blockbuster. What they got instead was an expensive, tone-deaf mess. Directed by Stanley Donen and written by the screenwriters of The Sting, the film couldn't decide what it wanted to be, Romantic comedy? Action caper? Satire? The result was a bloated, confused spectacle that sank under its own weight. Production troubles, last-minute rewrites, and on-set tension only made things worse. Fox poured a staggering $13 million into it, a massive budget for the time, only to watch it crash and burn at the box office. Despite the star power and glossy presentation, audiences felt nothing for the muddled plot and unconvincing chemistry. Critics pounced, calling it a pretty shell with nothing inside. Lucky Lady became a textbook example of 1970s studio excess. Too much money, too many egos, and no clear vision. A dazzling disaster dressed up in champagne and sequins. The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1977. The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1977, had everything going for it. Based on H.G. Wells' haunting novel, it promised a chilling sci-fi tale of ethics, evolution, and madness. Burt Lancaster starred as the infamous Dr. Moreau, a brilliant but twisted scientist turning animals into human hybrids on a remote island. The concept was ripe for horror, yet the execution lacked bite. Critics found the pacing sluggish, the tone inconsistent, and the makeup effects unintentionally goofy instead of grotesque. While Lancaster delivered a strong performance, the film failed to fully explore the terrifying implications of Moreau's God complex. Audiences, expecting thrills and suspense, were left underwhelmed by a talk-heavy plot and undercooked horror. Released in the shadow of smarter and scarier science fiction films of the decade, it faded fast. Though it didn't kill a studio, it quietly slipped into obscurity, remembered mostly as a missed opportunity. Later adaptations would fare even worse, but this 1977 version remains a strange, underwhelming relic, proof that even the best source material can flop without a bold cinematic vision to bring it to life. Darling Lily, 1970. Darling Lily was supposed to be a grand comeback, a glamorous World War I musical espionage romance starring Julie Andrews and directed by her husband, Blake Edwards. On paper it was gold, but behind the scenes, a slow-motion disaster. Plagued by constant rewrites, production delays, and ballooning costs, the film spiraled out of control. Paramount sank over $25 million into the project, an astronomical budget for the time, betting on Andrews' charm and Edwards' vision. But audiences weren't buying it. The mix of light-hearted musical numbers and wartime spy drama felt awkward and confused. Even Andrews' typically magnetic presence couldn't save the uneven tone or sluggish pacing. The result? A critical and commercial failure that nearly destroyed Edwards' Hollywood reputation. The studio butchered the original cut, chopping it down and scrambling to salvage anything marketable. In later years, a director's cut hinted at the film it could have been, elegant, daring, and emotionally rich. But in 1970, Darling Lily was the bomb that set the tone for a decade of caution. A beautiful misfire, caught between genres and sunk by its own ambition. Sextet, 1978. Sextet was Mae West's final film, and unfortunately it showed. At 84 years old, West insisted on playing her signature role, the seductive, irresistible bombshell. But what once came off as bold and witty now felt awkward, cringeworthy, and painfully out of touch. The film features West as Marlo Manners, a sex symbol marrying her sixth husband while dodging ex-lovers, spies, and international chaos in a Beverly Hills hotel. If that sounds confusing, it is. With a bizarre cast that included Timothy Dalton, Dom DeLuise, Ringo Starr, and even Alice Cooper, Sextet quickly unraveled into a campy, surreal mess. The dialogue was nonsensical, the pacing erratic, and West, relying on cue cards and dubbing, barely able to deliver her lines. Critics annihilated the film, and audiences stayed far away. It was more than a flop, it became an unintentional comedy, a cautionary tale of delusion and ego unchecked. United Artists hoped for a raunchy cult hit, but instead, they got one of the most infamous failures of the 70s. Sextet didn't just end a career, it nearly buried it in glitter and lipstick.